Hey guys. So I'm so happy about this session because it's one of the things that's really strange in my job is that you know, and you guys see this, you meet so many different people and you're just like, why are these people not working together? And they're in the same city. So the most extreme example of that to me is Baltimore. Because when I was, I don't know if you guys know, in the Pluto team, the team that went to Pluto, the NASA team and others working together, there's a big part of the leadership is in Baltimore. And so also Raj Chetty, who's from Harvard, he got into the IRS database with some grad students and started doing some really interesting research that was looking at the poorest Americans. And what he was looking at is, for the poorest Americans, several questions, and one of them was about location. He wanted to know if where you lived, did that matter? What kind of effect did that have? And they found that if you lived in certain places in the country, you would make 40% more or less than sort of the average, which matters a lot at $12,000 or $14,000, right? Huge difference in amount of money that family has. And he found that this worst place to live was Baltimore. So how is it that like one group of people are going to Pluto and one group of people are literally in the poorest group of Americans in terms of mobility? That's a crazy thing. And they're within, 5 or 10 miles of each other. And I really think that a lot of the brigades and the things that you guys are doing are a big part of the answer. Because it's almost like people hide in plain sight. If you, for example, if I talk to the mayors and I'll say, who here's ever been to a tech meetup? So if I ask you guys, who here's ever been to a tech meetup? Right. Okay. Like, of course. Who's ever been to a hackathon? Right. Who's ever been to like a startup weekend? Who's ever been to Burning Man? No, just kidding. So, so I would be talking to mayors, and they might remotely know what Burning Man is, but literally there'll be no one in the room who's ever been to a tech meetup, and there's hundreds a day in America. So that's a pretty interesting thing. In fact, one time the president was going to Boise, Idaho, and we wanted him to connect this group because he was doing all this techie stuff. And so we thought there's got to be a couple meetups. There were like 14. In fact, the Girl Develop It meets twice a week and hacks all this stuff. And there's a Hack Fort, which is just listed as a conference just like South by Southwest in Boise. So we're hiding in plain sight on our teammates. And what's so cool about the Code Brigades is that you guys are bridging these communities. And in that are just extraordinary answers, because everyone in the different groups, whether you were in the poverty group in Baltimore, you are amazing and quite capable of doing things like going to Pluto, because you're figuring out how to deal with the situation you're in, right? Or whether you're in the Pluto group, you might be interested in helping these people or bringing the kids to be part of this and changing their future. So just kind of connecting you guys to that. And part of the work is to really take the effort like you guys did, and these guys are going to talk to you about this, is not doing things for people but with them. And one of my favorite examples of that is out of Red Hook in Brooklyn. There's a fun startup center there, incubator space, and they're near a projects area, a housing project. And so they thought, let's do a service project with the youth. They went over and found 16 to 24-year-olds, pulled them together, and instead of sort of thinking of them as victims, they said, you guys are now the digital ambassadors for this community, and we're going to do a little training, and then you're going to knock on doors and Wi-Fi, and we'll pay you. And you're going to Wi-Fi all the neighbors and help them and become the community liaisons. And those kids, of course, track right into the tech center right away, right? Because they just need a little bit of confidence and connection. And so that's, a lot of what you're doing. And they know extraordinary things that another person doesn't know. And if you start to put together these cross-functional teams, you really can accelerate a community. So that's my hope for this. And you guys asked me to talk a little bit about, in addition to that it's right to do, it also turns out that the more you study the diversity sort of numbers, and First Round Capital just did an analysis of the companies that they've funded over the last decade. And they found that all of their very top companies, they did Warby Pincus and Uber and others, their top companies have diverse management teams. They all do. In the top block. And also they found that of the companies that they had funded, any ones that had a woman in the founding team they were 63% more profitable. So it's interesting. As a venture capitalist, you should be paying attention to that. And as a team builder. And then also McKinsey has some studies that show that if you are in the top quartile in racial diversity, you're in the top quartile in economic performance, and the inverse is true for companies. So we have this strategic advantage that our country is full of all different kinds of people. People who always were here and people who just got here today. And the whole spectrum of that, and men and women, people from different parts of the world and our country. So it's a real opportunity. And so I'm going to turn it over to you guys because the devil's in the details. But I'll tell you, one of my favorite tricks that a management team can do is something that Lou Gerstner did to turn around IBM. And what he did was he knew that he wouldn't be able to change his management team, but he knew that he had tons of amazing people in the company if he could just hear from them. And so what he did was they had 8 employee resource groups. They had women, veterans, LGBTs, different groups. And so he gave them money, and he asked them to meet. And he said, I want you to answer 4 questions. How do I get more suppliers, customers, and employees from your community into IBM? And how do I help you thrive here and rise? And so it was amazing what came back. And then the second part of what he did was he said to his executive team, we're not a very diverse group of people, but that doesn't mean we can't know and be connected to these issues and what needs to happen and be mindful and smart. So every one of you is going to adopt one of these groups, choose whichever one you want. I want you to go to at least 2 of their events every quarter. I want you to sit with them multiple times a quarter. And when we talk about this, I want you to be very knowledgeable about what we're doing with this community, what they need, what their suggestions, what their brilliant ideas are, and then we're going to work together. And it really was a big part of turning around IBM, and it's something that we, in Silicon Valley, we have diversity in our top 20, but not our top 3, and we got to figure out how to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and thanks for doing this topic, and thanks for the amazing work you guys did.
Yeah, seriously, thank you so much for setting the stage for us, and thank you guys for coming and listening to this talk. Diversity is so incredibly important, and there's an incredible amount of resources and efforts that are happening right now, and so thank you for shedding some light on the larger picture, as well as why it's important in a kind of longer vision. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about our experience as a brigade. As you heard from Megan, and as Chris mentioned before, we're from Code for Philly. For anyone who doesn't really know too much about the Brigade program, we're almost like chapters all across the city. There's tons and tons of us. I do see a lot of Brigade folks today, so that's great. And we want to talk about building out this community because, as we've heard a lot about at this summit, it's really more about, we're getting less and less about civic tech being about tech and it being about more of the civic part of it. So, thanks. So a little bit more about us and our brigade and Philadelphia. Just a couple of quick numbers. For our Code for Philly website, we have 1,200 users. We have 1,600 meetup users, 150 civic tech projects. We get to 5 to 20 first-timers every single week at our hack nights. We do weekly workshops. Every few months, we do hackathons. We do seasonal programs with awesome people like Girl Develop It, doing an open source mentorship program. So, but what do all these numbers really mean? How does that translate into diversity? How does that translate into social cohesion, and how does that really translate into impact? So with Not For is very much what we have been adopting and sort of abiding by in the Code for America family. These 3 projects are Code for Philly projects. They all started with partners at the very beginning. The projects didn't start with data. They didn't start with someone's idea and then eventually went to go get a partner. They started with the partners at the very beginning. So Cycle Philly, which we've heard a little bit about all through the conference, and Unlock Philly, which is actually also about accessibility in the city of Philadelphia. GreenSTEM, which was all about education, environmental education, using hardware for your youth in the city. These all started with partners, and they are some of our most successful projects that we like to tell people about. And that's, again, as like Chris likes to say, partners first.
Yeah, we enjoy a very diverse turnout and participation at our events, and we think that's in large part because we take this approach of with Not For. We start with partnerships. We bring our organizations in the community to our events, and we start with that.
So anyone can be a civic hacker was the banner of a talk that I gave in February of earlier this year. And just a little backstory on me, I am not a technologist. And when I came to Code for Philly, I was just kind of going there. And this message of you don't have to be a coder to come to Code for, this is something that we said at Code for Philly, but it's something that all of our brigades say. You don't need to be a coder to be part of civic tech and civic hacking. So I grabbed onto that message hard, and I was like, great, how can I help? Because this movement, this community is amazing and awesome. So how can I help? What can I do? So what does civic hacking look like when you're not a technologist? Let's go ahead. So this is kind of where we have come so far in our efforts. Sorry, can you skip it? So this is kind of the organic progression of just very initially what that message has sort of gotten us to this point. We're a pretty good brigade size. There are other brigades that are bigger, but we meet every single week, and we have a respectable brigade size that turns out lots of different projects and people. We also get a lot of coverage. We have good media coverage of all of these projects. So there's a lot of attention and eyes on it, which is always fun and exciting. We've also been a really solid voice in the open data conversation in Philadelphia. So I like to think at least that when this has been something that was emerging in, the last few years, Code for Philly was able to help drive that conversation and sort of priorities around that topic. And we also have a really healthy, strong relationship with our city government, not just Office of Innovation and Technology, but departments all across. And that's also in part because we have thematic hackathons where we reach out to lots of different types of municipal partners. And then partner programs within the civic tech community. So as I mentioned before, we've partnered with Girl Develop It, and we've also partnered with other groups that do things like coding for youth in the city, Coded by Kids. And this is really helping to leverage all the other great efforts of the civic tech community and what they're doing, just even beyond what we're doing. So what could it look like? What else do we need to do? What's sort of the next step and the next level that we really need to take this to? So there's some remaining barriers that we've noticed as we've nailed down and stabilized other parts. One of them is engagement. So we have a lot of engagement opportunities in terms of programs, in terms of events that we host. So, I mean, there's lots of times where you can join us for something, but actually engaging and being able to get in on something right away, that's something that we could definitely be better about. And one thing that people have said to us when they come to our hack night is it's really big and kind of confusing and a slight bit intimidating because everyone seems to know what they're doing, everyone seems to know each other. So trying to really familiarize people with what they can expect and kind of what to do and how to move so that they don't feel so out of place when they come to that first hack night. And really talking to the first timers and getting them and following up with them. So obviously, you hope that someone will talk to you so that you know what's going on when you're there and maybe help you get started on a project or get started in another way, but also following up and saying, hey, what was your experience coming to Hack Night? How did that feel? What was missing? We're starting to do that a little bit more, but having a more systematic CRM, that's another barrier. And really articulating and appreciating contributions. So, when we talk about diversity we want lots of people with different skill sets, we want lots of different backgrounds and expertise. How do you sort of appreciate and celebrate those different types of contributions? When you're a coder and when you do technology, it's a pretty straightforward, it's a more tangible input. But if you're someone who, maybe you're an academic researcher and you just asked the right question, maybe you showed someone a data set that they didn't even know about because they didn't know that those two things were related. These are really big and tangible contributions that can totally change the course of a project. They're just harder to see. And really dedicating time and space for topical experts so that we can feel like they can feel like they're able to contribute and do something. And again, like getting them on the ground to be partners at the very beginning. And balancing flexibility and structure. So we want there to certainly be some structure so that people can get involved. And we've heard that because it's It's like an organic nature of the community. So if there's not any amount of structure, it can be hard to know where to start or how to start, or, what it even means to be a civic hacker, but also balancing that with some flexibility so that people can create their own meaning and sense of impact there. And I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, dedicating time and space for topical experts has really been one of our key tactics. And what that looks like practically is, when you do a hack night or you do a hackathon, put a theme on it, education hackathons or a environment hack night. And that kind of gives people who otherwise might not see their place in civic hacking a bridge into the community, because that's what they're passionate about.
Yeah, so redefining contributions is a really big challenge, and this is, reassessing our metrics around it. And this is, again, challenging because the way that someone can impact a project and change it for the better is really, it can be very difficult to see. So we want to change that narrative and our messaging very deliberately of saying experiments can be structured, iterations are efficient, skills are a deliverable. Experience is an outcome that we can say is measurable. Diversity is cohesion. These sort of newer notions of what it means to be contributing, and sort of riffing off of the new message of delivery. Delivery is a strategy is the deliverable? Is that the new code for me? Okay, great. Delivery is a strategy. Okay, thanks, Anna. Process is the product. When we're talking about the Brigade, the shipped projects, the apps, those are never, on a volunteer basis, those are never going to be the main thing that we can say, yes, this is what we're giving you. That's not our value proposition. Our value proposition is that we're building a community of people. We're showing a collective will around this, that people are willing to give their time and effort to build this out of passion, and that the process is valuable to them, and what they get out of that process is valuable to them. So co-creating new practices, I think that this is sort of our main idea of what impact should look like. Having not just civic technologists, but also really saying we want people to bring people from the technology community and people from the subject matter expert community. They're in their own separate bubbles. They have their own practices and the way that they think and the verbiage that they use, and trying to get them out of those bubbles and into a new bubble that is civic technology maybe, but co-created, right? Like co-creating these civic ideas and solutions, co-creating this community, and co-creating impact so that everyone has a shared stake in it and a shared ownership over it. So what we've been trying to keep in mind is, pulling up a chair and offering a seat at the table is not alone inclusive. Just asking someone to come and show up and then not giving them tools to really engage and contribute, it's just not enough, for us at least. So building on successes and recognizing shortfalls, sort of what worked for us, what we think has been positive, and then some places where we can improve still. We've been really good at creating a welcoming environment for the most part, getting more structured involvement through different programs so that people have a safer way to enter into the community. Organizational support, so that's, Code for Philly being able to kind of house and grow and scale projects a little bit better. Leadership opportunities, even at the Brigade level, and with these programs like open source mentorship was great because we were able to, on a short-term basis, give people new leadership opportunities, even if it was only 10 weeks to be an organizer. And strategic clarity for ourselves, like what do we want as a brigade? What are we trying to accomplish? And how do we know if we're getting there, or getting closer, or how do we know if we're missing the mark? So some goals for us, learning opportunities for newcomers. We want to have quick, light projects so that people can just get in, get their hands dirty, mess around and see what it is like that they want to get out of it, out of their experience at Code for Philly. Engage and retain talent and energy. We have a ton of incredibly skilled developers and technologists that come in. We want to get them, really nice projects to work on that are challenging for them to be working on, and that the project roadmap is sort of the solution there. And this is one thing that other brigades have been really great at, is creating project criteria and sort of a very clear articulation for people to start civic tech projects and what they look like and how they can be successful. Utilizing the wealth of existing open data. We have a ridiculous amount of open data. I don't know if that's like a thank you or not, but we have like 200 plus open data sets in Philadelphia to choose from, and I don't think that we use even close to them. So getting more people aware of the open data portal that the city has, as well as using it. And then, yeah, building more tech literacy and capacity in partners, really bridging this gap in between the different communities of practice and bridging the really just ability to communicate with each other and work together and actually collaborate in a meaningful way. So having workshops on things like the open data portal, but also having like partner toolkits and doing workshops just on approaches and technology, this type of thinking, creative problem solving, all of that good stuff. So our sort of key takeaway for you is civic hacking needs everyone, so make everyone a civic hacker. So go do that. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, and one great way to do that is, mix up where you host your events. Go get a couple Wi-Fi access points, get a box of cables, and go out to different places in your community that might not be, a tech center that's already wired up for your event.
Bring pizza.
Doesn't take that much to set up for a hack night.
Bring pizza and or coffee. That usually helps. Cool. The last slide is just questions. If you guys have any questions or feedback that you want to give us right away, and then how are we on time?
We've got plenty of time.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah.
You said you have like light projects to get folks started. Can you give some examples of what those projects look like?
So we want to have more light projects for people to get started on. Right now, all we have is actually Corey, who had this idea, is the instant answers, and you can maybe speak to this a little bit.
DuckDuckGo has an open source sort of hacking platform that allows you to build small apps as search results. So I am not a developer, but I was able to build our bike share map as a search result, and it's really accessible. It's small, quick, and light.
San Jose just had a get-together for light projects. There's documentation on that. Jill, actually, from Code for Charlotte, was just talking about some documentation as a quick way of getting involved. It's super important for projects, and it just doesn't get done. So it's a great way to kind of get someone started on those types of projects. And then in regards to our open source mentorship program, we had people working on civic tech projects who are beginners. What we found that really worked was a template project that you could just kind of choose a data set and then build your project based on that data set. So something that's almost like a template, but can be customized depending on what your open data set of interest is.
Where's that on DuckDuckGo?
If you just look at DuckDuckGo, duckduckhack.com, this is the URL for it.
Thank you.
So besides going to like Transparency Camp, where I've seen you before, and as many other like meetups, I'm also a Tipple alumni. So I very recently saw an advertisement as soon as I opened up Tipple magazine. Is there, I guess, a method to your madness as far as like advertisement and reaching out to the community and such?
That's a really good question. I think that it's a tough question, right? Because we kind of want to be open to everyone. Like my takeaway for this was we want everyone to be a civic hacker. So in terms of targeted advertising like that, I don't know. I don't want to like totally speak for anyone else at the Brigade, but I think we're more about getting advocates to really take the mission and bring it out into the world and let people be self-organizing at the Brigade level, because a project just won't survive if there isn't passion and real will behind it.
Some other tactics for promoting. Is your question more oriented around how do we get the word out about projects or about the Brigade itself?
Well, one, I was appreciating more so the placement of the ad. It's like, yes, my alumni. I can get with that. But I guess more more so the question is, what is the method to the madness? Like, is it just Temple that you're targeting? Because it's a great school to target. Is it, would I also see it in like Penn's magazine, for example? Kind of what is the logic behind it?
Oh, are you saying that there was a Code for Philly advertisement in Temple magazine? Not bought by us, not paid for by Code for Philly.
I'd say we're pretty opportunistic. A great way to get the word out is local blogs, newspapers, the transit agency. A lot of people have empty space for PSAs, or they want to have ads that they can backfill when they don't have enough advertisements. So like Cycle Philly, one of our projects gets advertised on a local technology blog whenever they don't have enough advertisers. And there's a lot of that capacity out there. And a lot of people are really happy to point that at a Civic project or at the Brigade.
Maybe I'll tweet you guys the advertisement.
Yeah, we'd love to see
Yeah,
it.
that would be great. I saw a hand back here.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. Like, what are some other ways that you get diverse peoples to show up, and not just in terms of like, race and economic status, but like age, things like that.
Yeah. So again, this is a really good question because the other sort of piece of this is that we're volunteers. Like we're not getting paid to do this, and we have to have day jobs for now, at least. But we do a lot of relationship building, like sitting down with people and going to them and saying, hackathon, like events are great to get people involved, not just on that one-time event, but to say, be a sponsor, be an in-kind sponsor. Like we don't need $1,000 from you for a hackathon. We need $300 from you to put your logo on something so that we can say this person believes in this mission. So a lot of relationship building, a lot of just like people reach out to us. In Philadelphia, there's a ton of energy and will. And I think this is really where this message is coming from, because there's so much hunger and appetite for this kind of work and this kind of collaboration, but it's just not happening efficiently. It's like technologists are really excited to work on civic tech projects. Municipal partners are like desperate for the help, but they like can't collaborate. Like there's just this disconnect of not even being able to talk the same language. So again, like it all kind of feeds into one another in a lot of ways, but just going out and almost like beating the pavement really is kind of one of the biggest ways that we handle
Yeah,
that.
joint meetups are a great way. We hosted a meetup recently with a group called Net Tuesday in Philadelphia, which is for people working in nonprofits, much older crowd. But then also we'll go out and we'll host our hack night at the local university and get all the students to come out. So take your brigade, take your events on the road, partner with other groups that have these diverse crowds, and do a joint hack night. Introduce that group to civic hacking and have them introduce your group to whatever their topic is.
Yeah. I think I saw your hand up, and then we can go 1, 2, 3 maybe. Does that sound good?
So just as an extension to this, like I'm a volunteer with the Brigade and Code for Boston, and I also do a lot of other volunteer work with a lot of like girl develop it, women who code, and I find there's a pretty big disconnect between them. And you talked a little bit about co-hosting meetups. Can you talk a little bit more about the kind of programs you've done to bridge those communities and bring them together into civic tech and civic hacking?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really been pretty recent that we've had any sort of capacity to do more deliberate kinds of partnerships. So what Chris is mentioning, the joint hack nights are nice because it builds into what we're already doing. And then hackathons are kind of like, all right, like that's great because they're big and they're sexy and we get a lot of press coverage. One thing that we did this summer and last summer that Girl Develop It piloted last summer, we kind of helped continue it this summer, is just straight up like a joint program of getting more women in open source civic tech projects. And we got a bunch of mentors, a bunch of mentees, gave them projects to work on over summer and just said, hey, go work on it, get as much done as you can and want to. And that was incredibly helpful for our social cohesion. And Kat, you can talk a little bit about that too, because Kat helped start the pilot, the original Girl Develop It.
Yeah, so I live in Philadelphia. I'm a developer and volunteer with Girl Develop It. And we reached out to Code for Philly last summer to start this open source mentorship program because, as you're hearing, there are a lot of kind of one-off events that get press, but there's not a lot of sustained volunteer efforts to engage diverse audiences in these kind of civic tech communities. So we reached out to Code for Philly to say we want to find mentors for these women that are trying to learn how to code or improve their current programming skills, and they want to work on real-world projects. So they have been a great partner for that. Actually, if you're part of a brigade in another city,
Open source mentorship program.
Definitely look into that or talk to your Code for America staff member if that's something that you're interested in doing, because it's kind of got a built-in model for you to improve the diversity of your community.
Yeah, like if you have something that you can collectively work on, or like even just a project, like working together on something, have found has been one of the greatest ways to strengthen ties and relationships. So I know we had a question here in the front. Do you still want to ask your question?
Yeah, please. I'm wondering if there has been, I'm not asking for specifics, but if there has ever been feedback about, I'm not coming back because X, Y, Z, and how do you handle that? Because I'm a Brigade co-captain too.
Oh,
and
awesome.
I'd like to know how to handle that.
Yeah, so we've done some surveys that ask, would you or would you not come back? Almost always we have people who say that they would come back. So I haven't encountered that. I did have one person, and it was actually weird, it was Chad O. So he left the meetup group and had asked why. He's the only person who's ever answered that question. He said, I'm just not that into civic hacking. And it was like so weird. I didn't know how to handle that. I was just like, what? You said that and like out loud, like what? So some people just aren't into it, and that's okay. And again, like because it's so driven by volunteers and you have to be sort of self-motivated, I think the self-selection is totally fine.
We also have a lot of people bounce off after their first event, just because they didn't get engaged the first night, and that's something we're always working to get better at, making sure that we greet people when they come in, we have a bank of projects that we can connect them to. But we can't get everyone, so.
Right, like we want to offer lots of different types of engagement and different ways to connect. But again, like as Chris just said, it's just not possible. But yeah, it's a good question.
Hi, my name is Ty Carroll. Like April, I'm from Code for San Francisco. And I like what you said about redefining contributions and looking at different metrics of building a community. So that's what I wanted to ask about. As you're building a community, there's the per project, but there's also kind of socially as a group. If we think of socially as a group, what are things that you've tried, specifics of what you've tried or what's worked in terms of building a cohesive group? You've brought together this diverse community, people coming from many backgrounds. What works to create a healthy group where you're actually getting real relationships and friendships among people who in their rest of their lives wouldn't be in the same room together?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And sorry to like field every single one of them. Do you want to give an answer first?
Well, the key to most of our approaches is projects and interests first. So we try not to kind of overly structure and push people into things. We try to let people follow their interest, go to projects that they have an interest in, and kind of let it evolve organically from there.
And that being said, the total opposite, because I'm all about structure. Not totally, but like the structure has been immensely helpful because even just us having a leadership team is like, great, I have my clear point of contact. I can talk to this person. I know what's going on, and removing that confusion and ambiguity allows people to start building bonds and talking to people. And our hack nights, because we do them every week, makes it a very accessible place to come, and we don't put pressure on people. So this is what Chris is kind of getting at, is like, we don't put pressure on you to be on a project the first night. That was a big problem. Like people are like, oh, I need to be helping because everyone else is already on a project and doing amazing things. FYI, even very advanced developers can be intimidated by it because it's like, I'm like, what project are you working on? Oh, I'm like solving transportation for the entire city. Like it's not what's happening, obviously, but it sounds that way, right? Like I'm solving poverty. Like that's kind of how it feels. And it's awesome. It's totally great because like in a way you are, right? Like that's what your end goal is. But just trying to like lower that entry point, right? And being like, you don't need to start on a project tonight. You don't need to start on a project next week. You can start your own project. That's awesome too. And just really trying to redefining. And so there's some like documentation that I want to do, but even just for ourselves, getting the message out and what we do is Civic Hacking 101 for our first timers, which has been incredibly helpful. An idea that we stole from some other really smart brigades. And I recommend it for everyone. And I think you guys do it at SF, right? Not every week. Okay. Yeah. So Civic Hacking 101 has just been like insanely helpful. So, how are we on time?
Are we over at 4 or 4:15?
Great.
What's it say outside the door?
Bill Bushy has something to say while we check.
All right, we've got lots
Beautiful.
of
Thank
time.
you.
Actually, a question. I mean, I guess I was wondering if you can talk about, I guess, how do you grow the leadership team? Because sometimes somebody comes to me and is like, yeah, I totally want to do a thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. And then it kind of, something happens and it never actually gets.
So Dawn might not agree with this, but my theory is to just throw people in the deep end and give them lots of responsibilities.
Oh my You are so lucky I'm me, because that only worked with Don McDougall. Like, no way does that work with other people.
So,
I'm
well,
started to talk in the third person.
We can walk that back a second. So what I mean by that is, you need to give people a clear area of responsibility where they can kind of run at their own pace with. You don't want to get into a situation where they're coming to you for approval on every single thing. So you can, define for people the space that they're going to work in, and then let them run within that space on their own pace.
So yes and no. I think that answers the question of ownership. The person needs to have ownership to be in a leadership position, so that not only are they executing on what you believe to be your strategy, but then also taking that strategy further. But a lot of times people come in learning, and so for me, I was learning not to code, but to organize. I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't an organizer, and I didn't know how to manage a community when I first came into this area. So I, hearing this is the need, this is the need, this is the need, it's like, well, that's great that we have those 4 kind of, big high level needs, but I don't even know where to start to execute on them. So that being said, the Brigade network is amazing in terms of who you can rely on. But I think having breaking things up into tasks and letting people do those things first, they'll start to see the bigger vision, and they'll start to take on that leadership, and they'll start to have some ownership. But it's a really fine balance. It depends on the person who you're trying to recruit. And I think that, I think it's case by case. And I think that it's getting a lot of people on a team, like a communications team, for example, first, and then letting the leader sort of set themselves apart, because they're the people who are going to show up. And that's almost what it comes down to, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have, a lot of people will come and express an interest in leadership, but really what matters at the end of the day is who's going to really start to show up. So you want to kind of start people off small and see who shows up, see who gets engaged, and then gradually give them a bigger area of responsibility and let them, so they can eventually just go at their own pace. Slack helps a lot too.
Oh, Slack is amazing. But it's like a big world. Civic tech is as a movement is a really big world. So I don't know. I think it's different, right? If you have a lot of institutional knowledge and you've been there for a while, it's a little more of a natural progression. Some people are really excited, but they only know it from the outside. So just depends.
How do you handle communication between leadership? Because in our brigade, we are kind of trying to figure out how much is to let someone run with something, but how much we need to have other team members know what that person's initiative is, so that they're not, talking to the same person, contacting the city or at a company.
Yeah, so number one, Slack helps a lot. That's kind of the center of our communications. But also, Google spreadsheets are really helpful. Every event we do has a spreadsheet of here's all the people we're reaching out to, here's all the sponsors we want to talk to, and just break that in the columns. Who's talking to this person? What's the last time you talked to them? Because, you don't want to have everyone stepping on each other's toes and reaching out to the same people. You want to kind of divide and conquer.
Other thoughts, other questions?
I have a question. Yes. It's a little bit off topic.
Okay.
Okay, so I kind of want to.
Let's be bold. Let's go off topic.
No, I mean, I work for the federal government, and let me just begin by saying that I think that this is amazing. I mean, I'm so energized with
Awesome.
the sessions today.
Woo!
We're trying to just get at the local level and all that. But having said that, I heard a lot about accessibility and access, giving people with disability, with disadvantaged people access to services, which is wonderful. But there's another definition that we deal with in the federal government all the time for the word disability, which is people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And we are required to provide services. So when we're talking about hacking and providing all of these services, is that taken into account at the city level, at the the community level? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, and Chris, you can probably also speak really well about this. So organizationally, we put very few constraints on any type of project. With that being said, we also have like accessibility consultants that just come to our hack nights, which we think is great. We also invite them to come speak and talk about just bringing awareness to accessibility physically, also digitally. There's lots of, I think you're talking about 508 compliance probably. Yeah. So again, like we don't have requirements on projects, at least at this point. I could certainly see it getting to that point, but for right now, we don't say you have to do X, Y, or Z, but we definitely try to bring them in to represent that very important type of accessibility as much as possible.
So it is present in the discussion. I mean, you do know about it.
Yeah, at our larger hackathons, we'll often invite people out who are living with disabilities to speak to their experience with that particular topic matter. So we did a transportation hackathon recently when we had a fellow in a wheelchair and a blind man come out and talk about their experience using transit systems. And it was very powerful. One of the slides the one fellow showed, he showed a map of the transit system. He said, "Hey, this is the map you're all used to seeing." And then he flipped the slide to the one with all the stations that weren't accessible, deleted, and he said, "This is my transit system. This is how I get around the city." And another thing he said was, you build websites, you make them compatible with IE7, right? IE8 and IE6. Well, there's more folks with disabilities using your site than people using it with IE6 and 7. So.
Right. Yeah, and you'll be right next. I just wanted to say as a last point to yours, we actually are also we're co-listed as an organizer for a hackathon called Evo Hacks, which is all about accessible wearable technologies. So we try to partner where we can and when we can. But again, like there's definitely a bandwidth issue for a volunteer organization. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And one more point, there's groups in your communities you can reach out to. Like we partnered for some of our early hackathons with the Aging Association. I'm not sure what their name was, but they came out with people and spoke to a lot of these topics.
So at Coach San Francisco last week, we were lucky enough to have James Ty come and speak to us, and he's here today at the summit.
Yes, he is.
Maybe our presenters could talk about Unlock Philly.
Yeah, and actually, on that very first slide of with not for, Unlock Philly's in the very little corner. And actually, Chris, you can talk about Unlock Philly because you were there for the original.
Yeah, Unlock Philly actually came out of an accessibility hackathon we had, and James was one of the key organizers there, and he reached out to a number of organizations in the city that work with people with disabilities. And yeah, this was the project he ended up putting together, and it was a result of this issue of, well, the transit agency has the elevators go out, right? And it happens all the time, and they kind of publish it here and there. There isn't really a clear place to find out because it seems kind of trivial to you whether there's a elevator out or not, but for someone in a wheelchair, if they get to a transit station, they get off the train, and then they find that the elevator doesn't work, they have to wait for the next train, get on the train, go to another station, get up, and then ride the bus back to where they wanted to go. So they built this application, Unlock Philly, which we were able to get the transit agency to provide an API of what stations were out right now. And then what Unlock Philly did was track that over time and put it on a map. So they would map the status of the elevators at various stations. When they were down, they would record it. They would record the performance of every station, and then they would post on Twitter when stations weren't accessible. And we actually saw the overall accessibility of the system improve greatly over time as we just brought visibility to the situation.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing up James. We're sad that he's gone, but at least he can still give to SF in San Jose. That's great. I saw a hand up over here.
Yeah, it was more of a comment to what you were saying. So I'm from DC, and in DC there's probably a good amount of meetups, and we're fortunate there's a good amount of meetups for women in tech specifically. So, but the problem is that we started getting a lot of different groups, so it's kind of a lot of duplication. So what a lot of the organizations have done is October is Tour de Code, so all these different women organizations, not just are coming together to host like a month full of activities, so then that way everybody can leverage their resources together, and we kind of have this 1 month where everybody looks forward to that way because they're all volunteer organizations. So I just wanted to put that as an example to show how you can do a lot with little, but also be able to partner. And then also because the groups have different interests as well. Some are very techy, and some of them are a little bit more on the business side. So for example, we just hosted Startup Weekend Women's Edition last weekend. And there were some women actually that they were like, oh, I really wanted more women here, but we basically told them like, October's coming up, here are the new resources. So that could be another way. If some of the folks who come your way are maybe looking for more different ways,
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about us talking about this is it's really reflective of how far we've come as a movement. It's awesome to see how many brigades are here and facing these same issues, and being able to like really see how far we've come to say like now we can get a little more nuanced and address these more complicated parts of this incredibly complex issue. So that's great input and just like a really great, I think that's a really good maybe ending point, unless there's like any other burning questions or final comments that anyone wants to give. Awesome. Oh, go ahead. Oh, thank you. Thank you guys for coming and listening.